Here is a Klaus Schumann, the former Director General of the Political Affairs and Democracy at the Council of Europe. Dear Klaus, please tell me, could you imagine some 20, 25 years ago that it might happen in Georgia? You remember better than others all what was some 20, 25 years ago in Georgia. The Georgians' strong aspiration towards European and Euro-Atlantic future. And what is wrong now? What is happening now? I myself, I'm not going to speak about theory. I would like to share some concrete experience. Some 12 years ago, I was the head of the ruling party, which is still ruling in Georgia, and which is now under the total control of the Russia. In my understanding, we Georgians now need from one side to consolidate all democratic forces, but from another side we need more clear position of the all democratic international institutions, including the Council of Europe. Because of many people in Georgia still are under the huge influence of Russian propaganda. I guess for that, the best way to educate people is to have more organizations like our school is. Tbilisi School of Political Studies is already 26 years old. And we are trying to explain to our participants, and some of them, they are here now in this room, and they are protesting, by the way. And we are trying to explain, to learn to each other why it's so important, why it's crucially important, dear Jack, to be first of all a citizen and to have a responsibility, understanding of the civic responsibility and civic culture. You may be a great scientist, a doctor, a musician, but believe me, nothing will happen for rest of society because of, first of all, you have to be a citizen. And what we are producing in our school, the good citizens for our country. We're trying to do our best. And in today's protest, during all these months, many of us, we are there on the streets of Tbilisi and other cities of Georgia. And you may understand why the Georgian government so much hates us, why are ready to kill the organizations and schools and institutions like Tbilisi School of Political Studies. But my time is, of course, limited. I know about it. And there might be some questions, but I would like, by the way, I had a text, but I'm not going to read because of your speech, and all speeches are so emotional. And Jack, and dear Klaus, I would like to ask you, can the Council of Europe do more for protecting the rights of protesters in Georgia today? Of course, I guess, of course can. but the organization, which is Council of Europe, it's about 3 fundamental principles. You know better than me, of course. But where are those principles now? We are speaking about democracy, and sometimes we say bureaucracy. We are speaking about rule of law, and at the same time, we are sometimes too polite towards some stupid, aggressive personalities and so-called leaders in today's world. So, dear friends, dear citizens of Strasbourg, my beloved city, and dear colleagues, dear friends, dear colleagues from the different schools, let's stay together. Let's protect the rest part of democratic forces and democracy we still have. That is why we need your support. We will do from our side our best, but we also need more solidarity and more support. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Armas. C'est difficile après toi de reprendre la parole, mais je voulais juste dire que mardi, je suis revenue du Portugal et j'ai rencontré à l'aéroport de Bâle un groupe de jeunes. J'ai compris le même temps que moi pour venir à Strasbourg et qui étaient des jeunes polonais, des jeunes géorgiens. Sorry. Et ces jeunes qui sont ici, j'ai reconnu encore quelques-uns qui sont là, j'ai parlé avec eux et ces jeunes ont l'espoir et veulent lutter pour leur pays. Et je trouve que c'était un moment important de penser à ça en ce moment, avec toute cette violence et cet appel que tu as fait. Il faut qu'on lutte pour la démocratie, de voir que ces jeunes, et ils sont prêts aussi à lutter pour la démocratie et pour leur pays de demain. Je passe maintenant la parole à John, qui est le nom européen ici, américain. Et on regrette beaucoup ce qui se passe aussi en ce moment aux États-Unis, avec une démocratie qui ne peut plus s'appeler de démocratie, avec un président qui fait le beau temps, qui change tout le temps, avec des partis démocratiques qu'on ne sent pas. Je pense qu'aux États-Unis, ils n'existent pas. Ils commencent seulement maintenant à contester Trump. Il détruit la Maison-Blanche, personne ne dit rien. Il fait marche arrière surtout sur la question de l'Ukraine. Comment on voit, et comment toi tu vois, l'évolution de la démocratie dans ce pays que nous aimons, qui sont nos partenaires et que nous n'arrivons plus à comprendre.
Tout d'abord, je tiens à remercier ceux et celles avec qui j'ai partagé le panel. C'est vraiment un grand honneur pour moi d'être parmi vous ce soir et avec vous. Personnellement, je n'aurais jamais pensé partager un panel avec quelqu'un qui a gagné le prix Nobel. Donc, je suis vraiment très, très fier d'être parmi vous ce soir. La tâche qui m'a été un peu donnée ce soir, c'est de parler de mon pays et d'essayer de l'analyser pour vous. C'est une tâche qui est difficile parce que je crois que, à mon expérience, tout le monde pense connaître très bien les États-Unis. Les avis sont très tranchés sur la situation. Donc si ce soir, ma tâche modeste, ou mon objectif modeste, c'est que vous puissiez partir avec peut-être quelques nuances qui pourraient enrichir votre compréhension de la situation, je me contenterai de ça. Et si vous permettez, je vais parler en anglais parce que c'est ce que j'avais parlé. The very first thing I want to say is that some of the things which President Trump is doing, are sometimes perceived in the United States, and I think are largely perceived internationally to be within his powers as the president. And so I wanted first to walk you through and describe for you that some of the major initiatives, in fact all of the landmark initiatives which President Trump is taking, are actually illegal. So I want to start with the tariffs. You may have the impression that the President of the United States has the power to create tariffs. So he does not have that power under the United States Constitution. Tariffs and taxes are explicitly controlled under Article 2 of our Constitution by the Congress. And the Congress cannot delegate that authority to anyone else. What President Trump claims is to be acting under a law called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. If you read that act, which I have, you'll see that it's very narrowly written. And the emergency is not any of the things that President Trump cites, like balanced payment deficits, revenue generation, developing negotiation tools. So our Supreme Court heard this case today, actually, I believe. And we will see. Our Supreme Court has had some difficulties of late. But it's very clear on a textual basis that the tariffs are not within the powers of the President of the United States. And it's very important to realize that that is not a normal attribution of the powers of the office. The second initiative I want to talk about is the mass deportations. I want to give some sense of what that actually is and what it is not. So, immigration agents are going to businesses, which they have the right to do under the law, and inquire about employees there and their immigration status. They are going to public spaces in particular, where they believe that illegal immigrants exist, in places like parking lots, places where farms, places where they would get work. And sometimes they're going into homes. Now, to go into a home in the United States, there's two ways. One is with a judicial warrant, meaning from a judge. They're not using those because they can't get them at the moment. But there's a way to go into a home with what's called an administrative warrant. An administrative warrant, it means that the person doesn't have to let you in. In other words, the judicial warrant, I would have to let you into my house. I cannot refuse. If it's an administrative warrant, I can refuse. Okay? But of course, when a bunch of masked men show to your house with a warrant and say they have a warrant, they don't say which kind, a normal person, being terrified, will let them in. And that's how they take people out of their homes. Other things that are happening. Unfortunately, our Supreme Court has, for the moment, and it's complicated, and I don't want to cast aspersions on the Supreme Court unnecessarily, but for their own reasons, which I can explain if there are questions, they have temporarily, at least for now, allowed racial profiling in the immigration agents' actions. That is to say, if they believe a person is Spanish-speaking, if they believe a person looks like they could be a legal immigrant, all kinds of very superficial characteristics which are generally illegal, but for some reason, which I can explain if there are questions, they have carved out a temporary exception for that. So that is going on. They have suspended, there were rules that prohibited immigration agents from raiding places like hospitals, churches, marriages, funerals, schools. Those have all been suspended. And so they can raid those places, and they do raid those places. And finally, perhaps the most grievous of all these illegalities is the suspension of what's called due process in the United States. Due process means that if you are held by the authorities, you have the right to contest that before a judge of some kind. Okay? So under a law called the Illegal Enemy Aliens Act, President Trump claims that he can suspend this right, which is entitled to all people, not citizens. The United States Constitution says every person has the right. Every person has the right to go before a judge. That includes anyone who's undocumented or otherwise. So President Trump has claimed the authority to suspend this right, and therefore he can deport you immediately. You can be arrested and deported within 24 hours. And you can imagine that with the racial profiling and others, there have been American citizens who have been deported within 24 hours. Right? There have been people who have documentation who have been deported within 24 hours. And you find yourself in El Salvador, or South Sudan, or any other place which they have made a special agreement with. So this law also does not permit what President Trump is claiming. The law is designed for, if the United States is invaded, the president can, for citizens of the country which has invaded, he can remove those people from the country automatically, which makes sense, correct? That is not the case here. What he is claiming is that the United States is facing an invasion, quote unquote, of illegal immigration, okay? So this is a practice which I will talk about as I move along, in which there are almost magical interpretations of laws, which the country is asked to believe, and under which the kind of mirage of law, all kinds of things are taking place. The third one I want to talk about, and then I will talk about some reasons for this, is the strikes you've seen in the Caribbean against alleged drug traffickers. So, in the United States, there's two ways in theory that war can be declared. The first is by the Congress, has to approve declaration of war. That's more increasingly rare since 9/11. And the second way is under a law called the War Powers Resolution of 1973, I believe. The War Powers Resolution says, it's a congressional law, says that the president can authorize military force for 60 days, but after 60 days he has to ask Congress for authorization. President Trump says he's not using the War Powers Resolution because of course he's gone over 60 days. So if he's not using the War Powers Resolution and there's no declaration of war by the Congress, that means that this can only be what would be called in international law, international criminal action, right? It's a police action. In which case you cannot kill the suspect. That's called murder or vigilante justice, right? So when I say that the things that President Trump is doing and claiming that he has authority of law to do, he does not. In almost any simple, plain, you don't have to be a lawyer to understand these statutes, that all the major initiatives that he's taking are evil. What I hope I can do for you in the next 3 or 4 minutes, because I know time is short, is just give you some, perhaps, enriched understanding of how we got here. I have 2 minutes. I will try to resume the entire rule of law situation in the United States in 2 minutes. I think the major point I want to get across to you is that this has been a very long time in development. It's not a singular moment. It's not particularly President Trump. He's exploiting cracks in the rule of law system, which have developed over about 20 or even 40 years. And I guess, because I believe this is a mostly international audience, I will just mention, if you've not heard of an organization called the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society is an ideological movement in the legal profession in the United States, and it is a very, very influential factor. 6 of our 9 Supreme Court justices are members or have been members of the Federalist Society. They believe in things like what they call the unitary executive. That means that the executive is almost quasi-authoritarian. They believe in a hyper-restrictive interpretation of the Constitution so that no new rights can be created, and any rights which they believe are not explicitly written, for example, the right to abortion, do not exist in the Constitution. They believe that, and on the basis of this ideology, they have overturned and uprooted facts of American life. So I want to close with this example just because I think it's very important for international audiences to understand. You probably believe, as most Americans do, that the Constitution grants Americans the individual right to have a firearm, a weapon, and to use it, right? The famous gun culture in the United States. In fact, the United States Constitution does not do that. And for 100 years, it was not interpreted to do that. And that's why we have 100 years of laws on gun restrictions. But starting in 1980, under the influence, heavy influence of the Federalist Society, the Constitution was reinterpreted, which if you know Anglo-Saxon law, we have a system called stare decisis, which means that we try to implement change law gradually over time. This was a revolution, a radical revolution, in which they reversed 100 years of American law in order to create a new right called the individual right to bear arms, and we all know the consequences of that today. So the cracks in the American rule of law system, which we are now seeing and which are having more and more impact, have been in the making for a very long time and are now being exploited by a movement and a person leading that movement with evil intentions. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Je vais passer maintenant la parole à la salle. Il y a des micros qui vont circuler. J'ai énormément de questions, mais je pense que dans la salle, il y a aussi des gens qui aimeraient. Est-ce que, voilà, madame, voilà, il y a le micro et là, il y a un autre. Voilà. Merci beaucoup. Est-ce que vous pouvez dire your...
Hello?
Yeah, can you say your name, please?
Yes, my name is Claudia Merkel. I'm from Poland. I lead a team of experts on education. I'm also a policy student. And I wanted to ask you about something I've noticed and maybe to explain it better. Because I think that we are coming from two different parts of Europe in a way. Because we have this beautiful tradition of French and British philosophers who kind of allowed us to talk more about values and like to come to the conclusions what actually is human rights. And we were able to create all of those amazing laws that we want to protect and that build our society. But I've noticed that we want to be this rational, high ground people, but on the other side, when you live next to such an oppressor, you notice that, for example, countries like Poland and Eastern Europe do not sign many international law that the West would seem like normal, like we do not sign the Convention of Cluster Munition, which is this illegal type of weapons that Russia is using, and we kind of are living into different aspects of it, that we cannot be fully this way because we know the danger, and because of this thing that we're talking about countries backing up from certain, like the charter, like you were saying, Mr. from the UK, I was thinking that will there come a day that some countries like Poland will have to step up from certain international law because we would have this aggression so close to us of people who play dirty, who kill, who murder, who bring harm, and we would kind of, on one hand, we don't want to do the same, but at the other hand, we will probably maybe be in a situation that we would have to play dirty. And what to do with this and how we can create an alternative so we don't have to go to this point.
Alors, je vais demander à Frédéric.
Je vais pas pouvoir répondre complètement à votre question qui est très large. Simplement pour dire que les systèmes de droit permettent effectivement de gérer des situations exceptionnelles comme celles qui peuvent être que vous avez décrites parce qu'il y a un danger immédiat, parce que l'État même est en danger. Vous avez dans la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme cette possibilité de suspendre les droits de manière temporaire pour gérer ces situations extrêmement difficiles de guerre, par exemple. De l'autre côté, vous avez aussi, de manière internationale, du point de vue international, des lois qui viennent régir ces situations de guerre. La question qui est aujourd'hui probablement la nôtre, c'est comment faire fonctionner ces systèmes-là, comment est-ce que ça ne devient pas l'état du droit qui finalement vient nier les droits fondamentaux. Et c'est toute la question de savoir, vous savez, en Europe, les États ont repris dans certains cas la possibilité de contrôler leurs frontières, il suffit d'aller à Quelle pour s'en apercevoir. ces situations sont temporaires pour gérer des situations d'urgence. Or, le temporaire, la France, par exemple, le fait depuis les attaques terroristes, de 6 mois en 6 mois, elle remet effectivement un certain nombre de contrôles. Et toute la question, c'est de savoir si, du coup, le contrôle redevient la norme ou si on reste dans l'exception. Et je pense que, quelque part, votre question, c'est ça qu'elle suscite, même si elle supposerait qu'on aille probablement encore plus loin sur ce difficile équilibre. Mais je pense que dans les choses qu'on a discutées de ce soir, il y a beaucoup de ces situations d'exception qui deviennent la normalité et qui du coup viennent déformer les droits humains qu'on évoquait tout à l'heure.
Merci Frédéric. Prochaine question. Madame.
Bonsoir, je suis Anne-Marie Brisebois, je suis une citoyenne strasbourgeoise qui se questionne, qui essaye de comprendre le monde. Moi j'ai une question par rapport à la police qui me taraude depuis plusieurs années. C'est comment démocratiser la police, parce que la police ce sont quand même, comment l'humaniser, enfin ce sont quand même des citoyens également qui sont derrière ces uniformes et j'ai du mal à comprendre qu'ils... c'est comme, j'ai l'impression qu'ils se déshumanisent eux-mêmes parce qu'ils doivent quand même aspirer aussi à des libertés ou je pense aux gilets jaunes, comment ils doivent avoir des aspirations identiques que les manifestants auxquels ils s'en prennent. Voilà. C'est une question un peu sur qu'est-ce qui se passe dans la tête des policiers et comment faire évoluer cette vers plus d'humanité, de démocratie.
Ce sont souvent des jeunes qui pètent de trouille.
Souvent, les policiers, ce sont des jeunes qui pètent de trouille. C'est surtout ça.
Non, c'est pas toi de répondre. Est-ce que quelqu'un dans le panel veut répondre?
Je pense qu'on pourrait dire peut-être deux choses. C'est d'abord rappeler que la police, dans nos États, le monopole de ce qu'on appelle la violence légitime, donc ils sont dans un cadre, et que ce cadre, il est par exemple, il évolue sous l'influence de la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme, dont on a parlé tout à l'heure, qui à la fois va demander un certain nombre de procédures qui permettent d'encadrer effectivement un certain nombre d'interventions, et puis qui vont soumettre les policiers, comme tout autre service public d'ailleurs, à un contrôle de la part des juges, ce qui renvoie effectivement à la question de l'état de droit qu'on a pas mal évoqué ce soir. Mais je pense que ce sont ces éléments-là qui vont permettre effectivement de contrôler l'ensemble de ces forces, qui évidemment peuvent être des forces dangereuses, comme je l'évoquais rapidement tout à l'heure. Il y a même avec la guerre, un droit de la guerre. Toute la difficulté, effectivement, c'est d'arriver à appliquer ce cadre et à faire vivre ce cadre de manière démocratique.
Je voulais juste ajouter qu'il y a des conventions au Conseil de l'Europe qui surveillent, qui investiguent l'actuation des policiers dans les pays et ils font des recommandations au gouvernement et demandent au gouvernement de répondre à des questions que ces comités, notamment il y a un comité au Conseil de l'Europe qui visite des prisons et qui regarde la situation et le comportement des polices. Mais je veux aussi dire que le comportement des polices dépend aussi du comportement des États et des gouvernements. D'autres questions dans la salle? Oui, ici devant.
La lumière est allumée.
Bien, merci Fernanda. Je voudrais partir du fait que dans l'intervention du professeur Frédéric, j'ai bien compris la mise en cause de l'universalité des droits de l'homme, la mise en cause de leur suprématie, ici et là. Mais je pense que cela est normal. J'ai également entendu tout à l'heure, je crois, le professeur Président dire que nous avons de plus en plus, et de par le monde entier, des droits qui sont de première génération ou de deuxième génération. Les droits humains sont ici et là remis en cause tout naturellement, au prix ou alors par rapport à d'autres considérations. Mais je pense que ce qui nous réunit, autant aux États-Unis, les Américains, les Africains et même les Européens, c'est la dignité humaine, c'est les libertés, c'est inaliénable de toute façon et partout, nous devons y travailler. Alors, au lieu de parler en termes de qui a peur des droits humains, cette problématique m'a fait problème. Je me suis demandé, est-ce qu'il ne fallait pas plutôt se poser la question de savoir qui a le courage de préserver, de promouvoir, de défendre les droits humains. Est-ce que ça n'aurait pas été la problématique qui devait nous réunir autour de cette salle? Parce qu'un forum comme celui-ci, les écoles citoyennes et politiques, comme il en est le cas, les écoles d'études politiques du Conseil de l'Europe, j'ai, en tant qu'Africain, Camerounais, créé une école citoyenne et politique. Je crois que c'est les mêmes problématiques et nous devons nous mettre ensemble pour combattre l'injustice, pour préserver la dignité humaine et les libertés. Je vous en remercie.
Merci. Je vais demander, je pense qu'au président des écoles politiques de répondre. Jack.
Je suis entièrement d'accord sur la dignité humaine. Je voudrais juste expliquer, parce que il y a peut-être un malentendu avec la question qui a peur des droits humains. Mais qui a peur des droits humains? Je ne pense pas que ce soit les gens qui sont dans cette salle. Exactement le contraire. Ceux qui ont peur des droits humains sont ceux qui sont en train d'opprimer les gens. Parce qu'ils savent qu'ils sont en train de faire quelque chose qui n'est pas acceptable. Et c'est pour ça qu'ils cachent les gens dans les prisons. C'est pour ça que dans certains régimes, ils les jettent par la fenêtre. Et donc, la question, il me semble, est parfaitement admissible. Et il faut la comprendre dans ce sens-là. Parce que nous voulons tous avoir nos droits. Et c'est quand on voit que quelqu'un comme Poutine ou quelqu'un comme Trump, qui sont ce qu'on appelle en anglais bully. Bully, c'est celui qui, dans la cour de récréation, essaye d'être violent avec ceux qui sont plus petits que lui. Mais lorsque on répond, là, je reprends ce que disait Olga avant sur l'attitude vis-à-vis de l'agression russe. La seule façon de répondre, c'est en utilisant les mêmes procédés que les bullies utilisent. Et à ce moment-là, ils s'arrêtent parce que ce sont des lâches et c'est parce qu'ils ont peur des droits de l'homme eux-mêmes. Voilà.
Merci, Jeff. Je passe ce question. Yeah.
Actually, I'd just like to come back, I think, to the point of the Polish questionnaire, the very first question, and whether, in fact, we're asking too much of states that feel, or countries that feel, they're right in the front line of a major onslaught to actually maintain human rights. But I would say, in contrast, actually, it's the human rights you're fighting for, and it is absolutely vital to preserve those basic human rights. I've just been reading a couple of books that have just come out from Russian exiles about the world they faced and why they fled Russia. And the thing about Russia under Putin today is that it's a police state again. There was a moment, a brief moment, when it looked like Russia was going to emerge and not be a police state. But now it is, and the likes of what is today called the FSB, used to be the KGB, is actually in total control. Now, we've got to fight that those sort of secretive police are not allowed to operate undercover. And I think that that is something that we have to do. The question then about the control of our police forces, transparency is absolutely vital, and political control is absolutely vital. And I come back to being a journalist like Fernanda and saying it is up to us to expose those forces of the state that actually do try to behave in secret against all those fundamental rights of not torturing, not locking up and throwing into a dungeon where they can't be seen. So I actually think we've got not to lose sight of basic human rights that are set out in the Convention. It's still absolutely vital.
Thank you very much. Armas, and there are another question later on, but Armas before.
Thank you. All of you, of course, you know that this year is the 75th anniversary of the European Convention on Human Rights. Thinking about our panel and my speech during the last days, I thought that it would be good to dedicate the speech to those who are now the political prisoners in Georgia. But then I decided it's better to say that I'm dedicating to them not just a speech, but all minutes, seconds, hours, and days I'm in Strasbourg. Because they are dedicating their life to freedom, democracy, and human rights. Some of them, they are here. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Armas. At the end, you can come here if you want, but now, another question, please. Next.
Good evening. My name is Konstantinos Kougas. I'm a PhD student and member of the youth delegate of Symbiosis from Greece. Now, as I mentioned, I'm Greek, and I would like to express this question to Mr. Quelle. Forgive me for buzzing in the United Kingdom's politics, but I do happen to have some friends from Northampton, from London, from Manchester and the like. And you mentioned that it's a democratic failure that a lot of the citizens of the United Kingdom are considering leaving the European Court of Human Rights. At the same moment, the same citizens are faced with events such as the man that was killed last week for just walking his dog in Uxbridge, or the videos of the schoolgirls that are brandishing knives and axes just to go to school safely. Excuse me. Now, whose failure is it? Is it the Reform for just being the Reform Party, or is it the Labour Party's fault for not being able to protect the United Kingdom citizens? Because when people are faced with one rather, let's say, ethereal option of just leaving the thing called the European Court of Human Rights.
Is a question, sorry, it's a question, not a speech. Can you finish, please?
Yes. Which is the failure? The Reform being the Reform Party, or the Labour Party refusing to keep the United Kingdom citizens safe? Thank you.
I think that the danger of this is the racialization of a lot of the reporting of these attacks, and the implication that this is the fault of uncontrolled immigration. And that is the real danger about, I am not blaming Reform, and I'm not blaming the government for an individual individual crime, that has to be dealt with by the police. We have a police force that is, I hope in the case of the UK, largely responsible and responsive to political leadership, but you can't blame the politicians for individual acts. The trouble is when it's actually only those cases where there is a person of colour who might be involved as the aggressor are getting much more attention than those cases where it's not a person of colour. And I think that's very dangerous.
Yes, good evening. My name is Mikhail Zabotkin. I'm a political scientist based in Germany, even though I'm originally from Russia. And my question is in a way going back to the elephant in the room, I believe. We've heard a lot of calls on European governments, but also international institutions, to do more to defend human rights, the rule of law, human dignity and democracy, both abroad and in their own countries. And these appeals I share. And the elephant in the room is, why aren't they doing more if they can? So what is the problem? What are the causes of their reluctance to do so? And kind of the more positive question to connect this is maybe, well, what we, people of goodwill, so to say, would like them to do more, what can we do to pressure them more? Because since we're discussing this today, looking at the world, it seems that something's going wrong, right? We're trying to do something about it, it doesn't seem to be working out so well. What else can we do? What kind of strategy change could we try and implement in order to make things better? Thank you.
Toi qui a été dans des missions de paix dans des endroits de conflit, tu peux répondre, s'il te plaît.
Why aren't governments doing more? Well, I confess I'm not quite sure, but you may have a better answer than me, being a PhD student. My overall sense is that, and it's a very general sense, and it is with a kind of American lens, which is that that the 9/11 era changed this balance of weight, which my colleague Frederic also talked about, given to human rights. And once the exceptions were introduced into law, once special regimes were made, then it's very easy to make the next example of that. Right? And that's kind of what we're talking about tonight, which is that once you begin the process of erosion, it's very difficult to reverse it. And I think that is a trend which has been going on in almost every country in the world since the early 2000s, at least. So maybe that's just the gestalt of our times. What can be done more? I mean, again, I don't have any answers, and I'm flattered to be asked even. My sense is that new forms of political organization are needed. I don't know what those are specifically, but that there's a sense in almost every country that I've looked at or studied or am interested in of a kind of fatigue with the existing parties, fatigue with the existing alignments, but not a lot of clarity yet as to what the realignments are. And so there's some kind of political creativity to be done to fashion a new period, because the tools of the old period are obviously now past. That's my best attempt.
Oui. Une question.
Je m'appelle...
Oui, attends.
Je m'appelle Christian Kuhn, citoyen allemand par naissance, français par profession and American by heart. Do we need to found an international party for human rights? Because I get a feeling that today the majority of people around the globe seems to be afraid of human rights.
À qui tu diriges la question?
Oui, mais je ne vais pas donner la parole, donc si vous me oui, madame.
Merci. En effet, c'est moi qui donne la parole. Je n'ai pas beaucoup de pouvoir, mais je suis là et je vais l'utiliser, je vais vous donner la parole.
Pardon?
Je vais vous donner la parole. Pour une question aussi courte que Christian.
Oui, je voudrais vous parler d'une convention toute nouvelle qui est en cours au Conseil de l'Europe sur des droits spécifiques. Aujourd'hui, on a parlé des droits humains, mais c'est surtout par rapport à des opinions politiques personnelles. Moi, je parle de la maladie. La maladie, on ne la choisit pas, on l'a subie. Alors, il y a deux types de fléaux qui vont être pires que le narcotrafic. C'est les faux médicaments dans les hémisphères sud ou dans les pays en voie de développement où là, les gens n'ont pas le choix. Mais c'est aussi ici, dans la région, dans les pays, on va dire, plus développés, où ça se passe. Moi, récemment, j'ai rencontré quelqu'un, une dame, elle a vendu tous ses bijoux pour acheter des suppositoires dans le pays de l'Est pour son mari. Donc je crois qu'il faut lutter contre ça, et nous sommes en train, il y a une convention qui s'appelle Medicrime, dont je fais partie d'ailleurs, et qui aura lieu, donc la prochaine session aura lieu le 8 et 10 décembre, avec un certain nombre de professeurs, parce que là, il faut qu'on protège les gens. Parce que le problème est suivant, la drogue, les gens choisissent, la politique, les gens choisissent, la maladie, ils ne choisissent pas. Donc, si vous voulez, là, on doit lutter. Donc, on est en train de travailler là-dessus, et je peux vous dire que si ça ne s'améliore pas, ça va être pire que la drogue, ça va être pire que le narcotrafic, et c'est là aussi de protéger. Et les plus faibles, c'est les malades, c'est pas les politiques, excusez-moi. Donc, et je pense que c'est une vérité. Voilà ce que je voulais dire.
Merci beaucoup, vous avez tout à fait raison. Il y a eu un rapport très important d'une députée portugaise sur la vente des médicaments sur Internet, des faux médicaments. C'est un rapport qui a été fait il y a un certain moment. Il n'y avait pas encore au Parlement européen un groupe qui traitait des questions de santé. Oui, mais je vous parle aussi du Parlement européen, parce que je pense qu'aujourd'hui aussi au Parlement européen, il y a un groupe de travail récent qui travaille sur les questions de santé. Et je pense que c'est important, et merci de d'avoir référé. J'ai encore une question pour un jeune. Oui, et je dois... Oui, pardon.
Moi,
C'est pas jeune.
I answer the question, should there be a human rights party? I don't think so. I think all parties ought to be human rights parties. And I think it would be extremely dangerous if human rights became politicized in the sense that it was one group of people in a particular party who were doing that. I think it would be very antagonistic. And what I said, I think that all parties should be based on human rights, obviously there's more. So we know that that should be what we're aiming for, rather than having a single party.
Beaucoup de questions. On va prendre. J'ai perdu. Il y avait un jeune qui posait la question. Voilà, qui est là.
Hi. So my question is for our friends from the Eastern countries. I was wondering what you were thinking about. So you talked about Russia as an imperialist empire. They have this in their blood to enlarge and wanting to be greater and having enemies. In what way do you think it's the people that have these in their blood, or it's the power in place? And for me, as a young guy, I suppose I will live in an era post-Putin. And do you think it's one that is desirable, or that is hope in it? Thank you.
75% of Russian population supports regime. If it is not enough for answer, I would like to ask you, how many demonstrations in Strasbourg have you seen organized by Russian opposition or people who are against the regime? I haven't seen any. So that's the reply to your question.
And I fully agree. And the problem in today's Russian society is from one side the dictatorship of Vladimir Putin, but from other side it's a very damaged Soviet-style education system, by the way.
Puisqu'on a parlé de la question de l'éducation et que nous avons ici un ancien ministre de l'éducation de Portugal, quel est le rôle des écoles, des universités pour l'éducation aux droits humains et la lutte aussi contre les totalitarismes? Qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire, Monsieur le ministre?
Merci beaucoup. Well, it's a key actor, education and the educational system, not just the universities and academia, because academia is mostly failing in this case, in these subjects. We know that research is not being done in a proper way, I believe, because we have a big distance between knowledge, the creation of knowledge, and action. So we are working in research, we are working about knowledge, but we are not putting that knowledge as a driving force of action. So we are not, as academics, calling political parties, MPs, we are not calling because we belong to the civil society, and we are not being strong members of the society, elucidating the rulers that they must do different. But going back, because I have the responsibilities in the basic and secondary educational system, we must do much more than we are doing right now. It's true that all over the world, and I can speak about the Council of Europe, the European Union institutions, of course also in the UNESCO framework, we are trying to do more and more about European citizenship, about human rights, about international citizenship, the role of multilateralism. But every single time that we have the discussion in a national framework about citizenship education, we clearly can see how the world is divided. And in a given moment, and I had that moment in Portugal, when I tried to implement a national strategy of citizenship, speaking about multiculturalism, speaking about human rights, speaking about the role of governments to care migrants, to care about refugees, to try to update our frameworks in legal terms or in societal terms about how we should care about citizenship, and that idea that we belong to much more than our small family, small village, small country, or small continent. Every single time that we try to do that, we have movements within our societies. They started in the last decade, step by step, growing and telling school doesn't have the right to touch in our children, to speak about the way our children should be educated, about the way they feel the world, the way that citizenship is educated to our children. And it's very ideological, but we see how right extreme, far extreme movements are using schools and what the educational systems are trying to do to educate younger generations, and they are using it as a tool to try to increase the awareness of what we are doing in the educational system. And you can see every single day in Instagram, in TikTok, how human rights, citizenship, educational programs are being attacked, how NGOs are being attacked, how the Council of Europe is being attacked, how journalists that speak and work about human rights are being attacked, how academics and some of the departments that work in terms of research about human rights are being attacked. And that's the way that the extreme populist movements know that if they speak about a body that is not very well understood by the majority of population, they can have a target. And when they have a target, they win. Because we always need to explain more and more and give a